Welcome back to the IROC Business with Confidence podcast, your go-to resource for monetizing your passions while keeping your budget in mind. I'm your host, Corey Fonville Foster, transformational speaker, certified business coach, trainer, and CEO of IROC Marketable Business Solutions. In today's episode, we have an incredible guest who specializes in helping small business owners master the art of podcast pitching. Please welcome Nina Makarie, a visibility expert passionate about supporting women entrepreneurs in booking more speaking gigs, growing their business, and connecting with potential clients. Nina is the creator of the Pitch Podcast Framework, a powerful system that empowers entrepreneurs to pitch themselves to the right podcast with ease and authority. With her extensive experience in sending hundreds of podcast pitches and understanding the elements that make a successful pitch, Nina knows how to make an impactful first impression. Not only has Nina received fantastic feedback from her successfully booked clients, but she has also impressed podcast hosts with her pitch. Her mission is to help female online entrepreneurs, coaches, course creators, consultants, and podcasters create an amazing first impression as they spread their message on other platforms. Today, Nina will share her insights and strategies on pitching for podcasts specifically tailored to small business owners. Discover the essential elements of an effective podcast pitch and gain the confidence to connect with podcast hosts, increase your visibility, and attract your dream clients. All right, hello and welcome back. Today we have Nina with us, and we're going to be talking all about pitching for podcasts. Hi, Nina. How are you?
Hello, Corey. I'm fine. Thank you. I'm so grateful to be here today with you.
Awesome. I'm super excited that you are here because today we are going to be talking about pitching for podcasts. And I love that in the pre-talk that we had with each other, we talked about the fact that you've developed an amazing framework called the Pitch Framework. So I would love to get started with that today. Just you telling us, what is the Pitch Framework and how did you come up with it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure. So I started my online business, but I did not know exactly what to do. So I tried a few things until I got to podcast pitching, and then I fell in love with it. And while I was doing that, I also got to help a few of my clients managing their own guests. So I was able to see the pitches that they were getting and the pitches that they are put out there in the world. And then I thought, I'm looking at these pitches and my clients saying no. And then I'm looking at my pitches and how they are different. So this is how I was able to come up with this framework called pitch, because I realized that there are things that my clients need to do before I was actually going to pitch them. So I think it's a great idea to go through these 5 steps of my framework. So step number 1 is the P, prep your message. So here is where I want you to think about your expertise and what you want to be known for. Because I'm not sure, maybe you've seen in Facebook groups questions from people. They have a coach and their coach told them they should be guesting on podcasts, and they put themselves out there and they say, well, I want to get more visible, I want to get featured on podcast interviews. And then there are podcast hosts asking them, so what do you want to talk about? And they say all the things entrepreneurship or all the things marketing. And then I don't feel they get so much attention because they are not narrow enough. So in order for you to be able to land podcast interviews, you really need to have a narrow topic, because podcast hosts are interested in giving you a spot if you are able to help their listeners with this one specific thing. So this is why you need to have in mind your expertise and what is the number one thing that you want to be known for. What is the solution that you are going to offer to their listeners? then also it's important to have a few things in place, like your bio. You will have your topic, but then you can break it down in different ideas. And I think that today with this chat GPT, you can use it to help you come up with different titles, different suggestions for your talk. And also maybe have a few headshots that you can use, you can send to those podcast hosts so they can create the graphics that they are going to use to promote the interview. So first step is to prep your message and the things that you are going to use as soon as you are able to land that podcast interview.
All right, well, let's stop there for just a second because that was a lot of information. And I love that you start with the preparation of even before you send off the pitch, of having those items together. Because I know for me, when I first started pitching podcasts, it was quite a lot to put together, right? They were like, "Oh, I need your bio," and sometimes they need it quite quickly. They need headshots to use, or I would see a podcast I was interested in, but I didn't know how to even put my message out there. I was like, "Okay, I know I want to be on this podcast, but I'm not sure what to say to kind of convince them that I would be a great guest." So I love that you're telling us before we even start reaching out to get some things in place so that we show up professional, and that we can kind of make sure that the whole program goes as smoothly as possible. And I think that that's so important when it comes to the world of podcasting. So I want us to move into the I of your framework, because you said it was 5 steps, so we did.
Of course. So the I stands for identify the right podcast for you. So, how can you do that? Well, first of all, you need to have in mind your ideal client. So, if you are in business already, you kind of know who would you like to work with, and you will want to target those listeners. So, what I would do, for example, there are different way for you to find those relevant podcasts for you. First of all, you can, for let's say that I am targeting mompreneurs, then I can simply take this word and use it as a keyword on Apple Podcasts, for example. But then I will have to think about maybe other business owners who have complementary businesses. For example, if I am supporting people with podcast guesting, maybe I will show up on a different podcast that shares more about blogging, because these two are related. And then other idea that you could do, for example, is to um, have in mind that the topic that you are going to use, for example, podcast guesting, needs to be aligned with the topics that they cover on that podcast. Because, for example, I don't know, if someone teaches all things video, maybe they are not very interested in podcasting. Maybe they are seeing as a competitor, so they will not be interested in this. A more clear example, I had a client of mine, and she has a podcast and she teaches how to grow a business using a podcast. But what she did was to stop using Instagram. Initially, she only had her team using it, and then she doesn't use it at all. And every she posted a few episodes on this topic, and now every time she will have someone reaching out to her, telling that they want to get featured on the podcast teaching about growing an Instagram audience or the TikTok audience, she will say no, because this is not aligned with what she teaches. So you will have to scroll a little bit back and take a look at the previous episodes and see if your message is going to be relevant for the podcast that you are going to pitch. And keep in mind that you will want to pitch that narrow topic. So you are not going to pitch, I don't know, how to grow your Instagram. Maybe you want to pitch how to use to land more clients in your DMs or things like that.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense because I think a lot of people have a mistake of pitches, right? To different podcasts and they're like, "Hey, I want to come here." Or they'll just say, "I'm interested," but they don't know how what they talk about and what they their area expertise, how it fits into the podcast. I think it kind of goes back to the P for preparation and kind of doing your research, looking into the podcast you're interested in, and really saying, okay, what have they been talking about? How do they feel about these topics? What is their standing? What do they stand on when they are speaking on these different do align, then you're right. Then you should be pitching those podcasts. But I think we lose a lot of time, and it just doesn't really make sense if you're pitching podcasts that either don't agree with the topic you have, don't talk about the topic you have, or it just doesn't really make sense. I've talked to clients many times, like, take a second and do the research. Listen to at least one episode of that podcast before
Absolutely.
you pitch them, possibly several. You can even look at some of the people who've appeared on the podcast, check them out on social media, see what they do, because you will waste so much time pitching to places where you're not supposed to be. And when you hear that you're not a good fit, then you're upset. It's like, no, if you would have done just a little bit of research, you would have seen that that's probably not the podcast for you. So I want to go on a little bit because I know we have quite a few of this pitch process to go through. So tell me a little bit more about the next phase and the pitch process.
Absolutely. So the next phase is tailor the pitch. And here it's very important to stop sending those copy pasted messages. I'm sure that maybe you've seen, or maybe you are getting business related messages that are just all about how great I am, right? For example, if I don't know, would want to pitch my services and I would just send you a cold email, I would just say how amazing I am without even noticing you, without asking you a few things, basic things. So this is how I love to start my pitch is first of all, I really want to make a genuine connection with the host. And here, as you mentioned, is very important for you to take a look at their social media, at their website, and see if maybe you have some things in common. Maybe, I don't know, you are both cat lovers or things like that, or maybe, I don't know, they posted about an amazing accomplishment and you want to congratulate them or things like that. So, because I think we all want to be seen and appreciated for what we are, for who you are. And this is why I like to start this with making a compliment and just this connection with that podcast host. And then what I've seen is that usually people just make assumptions. For example, they say, if they are, I don't know, an agency or things like that, they will say, I have the perfect podcast guest for you, or I want to nominate this person who is going to be a great fit for your podcast. But you actually don't know what you do. You are just making assumptions based on what you see in their description, as you said, if you are going to listen to a few episodes, or what you see on their social media. So what I like to do is to ask them questions, because I don't know what their plan is for their podcast, but what I can do is to ask them questions like, seeing that, I don't know, you are covering these topics or you are supporting your clients with XYZ, do you think that this topic of mine could help them, I don't know, get more visible or grow their businesses or whatever you are teaching on? So this is what I like to do, just to ask questions.
I love that. I never even thought of asking. I guess I have asked questions, but I don't think I've ever made a point to do it. I wanted to give them a chance to like get the feedback, because you're right. A lot of times we do make assumptions like, I bet this will help their audience. And so I like the idea of asking questions, because I was thinking, just putting myself in the place of, I have a podcast. I think that would make me think somebody is really genuinely interested in what I'm doing, right? My project, my podcast. And I'm trying to think back to how many people really asked me a question about like, hey, what is this? Who's your audience and what have you done in the past and what topics do you think would be important? And I think maybe a few people have done it, but I never even like paid attention or put my mind to the idea of like people are asking questions because they're engaged. Like, and so I think that's a really good tool because that will definitely, I feel, set you apart from all the rest. Because most people just say, I'm interested. I want to be on your podcast. Is there a spot on your podcast? How do I get on your podcast? And it's just monotonous. People are constantly doing that. But yeah, if somebody actually did some research and asked me a question relevant to my actual project, I think that that would bring them closer to the top of the pack. You know what I mean? So
Absolutely.
so you got PIT and we did C, right? So what is the rest of the pitch? Oh no, we
So
didn't do
we
C.
no, we are at C right now. Yes, this
C.
is yes, C. It's create a system that works for you. So now that you start this process, you need to have in place some kind, maybe you are using a project management system, or for example, I start with Google Spreadsheets and then I will move to Asana, because you will need to keep in mind all the things. For example, I like to usually do batch pitching. So, like, I will find 10 podcasts, I will put in that Excel spreadsheet, like details that are important, and then they will help me to craft that personalized pitch. I will put their email address, the host name, things like that. And then I will follow up 2 times, 2 weeks apart. And when you are doing multiple things, you're not going to remember. But when you have a project management system in place and you put in there a reminder, then you will know when you need to do the follow up. Then you will have podcast hosts getting back to you and telling you to get back to them in 3 months, in 3 weeks, in 6 months from now. So, how are you going to remember that? Again, you need a system to remember all these details. As you mentioned, you need to send them your bio, your headshots. So what I do is I also keep in a Google folder, but also in Asana, all these details, because I'm going to need to paste my links quickly, for example, right? So you don't want every time to go to your website, go to your social media channels and copy paste them. When you have them in that one place, it's very easy for you to do that. So this is why you will need a system. Maybe for you works to follow up, I don't know, 3 times. Why not? So you will have to try and see what works for you and do more of that.
I
So
love that advice because when you were saying I don't have a system. I don't have a system and I get frustrated because I have a system for my personal podcast, but not for the podcast that I pitch. And you're right, like people can fall through the cracks. I've probably pitched several podcasts and not remembered to follow back up. I know just as soon as you said that, I thought about a podcast that they were like, they're not getting people right now, but check back in a couple of months. If I had a system in place, I would to check back in a couple of months. So I think that that is a great idea to create a system where you can easily track your progress. And then also sometimes you don't know what's working and what's not if you're not tracking it. So if you're pitching, like I said, if you batch pitch for a week and you notice that nobody's getting back to you from that batch, you can go back and look and see what you did, what worked, what didn't work, and tweak it so that your next set of pitches are better. Because I'm like you, I batch pitch as well. I down for a couple hours on one day, maybe once or twice a week. And I just find all the podcasts I'm interested in, send out my pitches then, because I find that if I'm in that space, it takes a lot less time than if I pitch here, pitch there, all over the place. And every podcast has a different system on how they want you to give them the information. Some are live, some are pre-recorded. And so you just have to kind of pay attention. Some you have to submit an application, some you're just shooting a DM, some want pre-interview, some don't. And so I love the idea of having a system in place to kind of track. I've done the pre-interview. I've sent all the stuff because there's nothing worse than a podcast host having to call, message you, or call you at the last minute saying, "Hey, I didn't get your headshot. Hey, I need your bio," because that then makes them less prepared to be able to actually have a good episode with you. So I love
Yes,
that.
or even worse, for example, not all of them are just like you to have this system in place for their guests. Some of them will just tell you, okay, let's book the interview. You will book the interview, but they don't send you the link because they don't have a
Mhm.
system in place. So then, 5 minutes before the interview, you realize that you don't have a Zoom link or whatever system they are using to record, right? So it's going to be a little bit frustrating. So this is why it's important, as you said, to know exactly what steps you've taken so far and what you have to do.
I love that. Look, we're giving a little bit of the behind the scenes tea because I can't tell you how often that happens where I'm like, "Hey, I need a link. Did you send me the link?" And I feel so bad if I ever forget. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, did I send the link?" Because people are waiting. I actually was excited about a podcast that I was supposed to be on recently, and they didn't send a link. I reached back out and said, "Hey, send me the link." That person got stuck in traffic. They were like on a train, then they were on a bus trying to get someplace. And all in all, look, long story short, we never got to do the podcast because by the time they got home, got situated, sent me the link, past my bedtime, I was like, okay, I guess it's done. Like I had already put on my pajamas. And so you want to make sure as a podcast guest that you can stay on top of those things. But if anybody's listening and they're thinking about starting their own podcast or they have their own podcast, I think it's important that we also acknowledge people's time and make sure we have a system in place so that people aren't waiting around for us to give them the materials that they need for everybody, right? Whether you're hosting the podcast or whether you're on the podcast, is to have an amazing episode, and you can't do that without all the pieces. So I think that was a great tip for us. So we are on the last piece of the framework. Give us the H. What does the H and pitch stand for?
Absolutely. So the H stands for handling the interview. So here is where you are going to take care of the logistical things, like, for example, mute your notifications, like wear headphones, do everything that it's in your power to help that podcast host to have a great audio. Sometimes things do not work perfectly. Guilty of that. So sorry. I'm sometimes, yeah, the technology doesn't help, but it's important for you to do your best. And also, it's important to stay on that topic. I mean, there are people out there who love to share things, and they just start with one thing, and by the end of that phrase, yeah, they will end up in a different place. So especially when you know that you have 30 minutes for the interview, try to condense the information that you want to send. I think it's important to don't ramble and share all funny things that happened to you today, last week, this year. And also, it's important for you to prepare a clear call to action, and if possible, to be the same call to action every single time you show up on podcast interviews or any other speaking engagements, because otherwise, you are not going to be able to focus those listeners into one channel. Because if one time you will share your podcast, or then maybe your Instagram, maybe a freebie, if they are not all connected, you are going to lose people. And also make sure that what you are sharing on that podcast is aligned with a freebie that you have, or with a podcast that you have, or I don't know, with a blog if you have one, and also the offers that you are going to use to serve those potential clients. Because I remember one time I was listening to a podcast, I was so interested in some templates that host was sharing about. She was so passionate, and I was so intrigued and very curious. And when I went to her website that she mentioned on that episode, I realized that actually her offers are totally different, have nothing in common with what she shared. So I think there is a disconnect, and I don't want you to miss this opportunity to help people solve their problem.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point because I think some people, especially people new to podcasts, don't understand that a lot of podcasts are pre-recorded, maybe months in advance. And so you really need to make sure whatever you share is evergreen, right? Or for the most part, like within at least 6 months, it's still going to exist because you may have a launch coming up. You may talk about that launch, and then the podcast host may push out your podcast 3 months from now. And then now that launch has happened, the offer has expired, and you've missed an opportunity to connect with that audience. And so it's really important for you to think about what can you say, what's your CTA, your call to action that can resonate with them no matter when the podcast airs. Also, when people like podcasts, they go back and listen to, previous episodes. And if that is the case, they may go back and listen to something that you put out a month ago, 2 months ago, a year ago, and still want to connect with you. And that happens. And it's happened to me. People say, oh, I saw you here, I heard you there, and they come and find me. And so just make sure that your links are accurate, that they stay consistent, evergreen. And like she said, stay on point. Sometimes when you have a newer or smaller podcast, it's not too bad. You do usually find out how long they're going to record for. However, when you get into like syndicated shows, they have to stop for commercial breaks. And so you have to be able to get your points very, very condensed so that you can hit those commercial breaks that they have, or you're going to mess up the whole episode. I literally did a show recently, and I think we recorded all the content was like 7 minutes long. That's all we had. And then there were breaks. And so you had to be able to quickly throw that out there, give great value, but be able to do it so fast that they could get to their break. So you have to kind of keep that in mind. If you're a very long-winded person, just shorten it. You may not be able to tell the long version of the story, just shorten it, just to make sure that, again, you're going to have a great episode and people are still going to get amazing value. So I think for some people listening right now, they may say, okay, I get the pitch framework, it sounds great, but I'm not a great writer. And I want to tell you that our guest here did not start off as the pitch expert. I love that when I read your bio, it said you were a stay-at-home mom, because I'm a stay-at-home mom too. And you did this because you took the initiative to learn this information. So just for those who may be saying, I could never, like, I'm not a great writer, can you tell us a little bit about, how anybody can do this process?
Absolutely, anybody can do this. Trust me. I mean, I've been there. When I started my business, all I thought that I'm going to do is to work behind the scenes. Because, as you mentioned, I was a stay at home mom and I did not have a lot of confidence. When I started my business, I was not even sure how this worked. But then I started working with clients. I also invested in coaches. And then I realized that in this world, it's so amazing that we have this opportunity to get our message out there. So why not me? And also, like, I live in this small country called Romania. I'm not a native English speaker. So I had all these fears and all these doubts. But then I was willing to put myself out there. And to be honest, I started small. Initially, I was in a program, and then the owner of the program invited a few students to be featured as a spotlight student on her podcast. And this was a great confidence builder for me because I knew her and I knew the other students. It was a very familiar conversation. So once I did that, I felt the most amazing person in this world. Like, it was such a great feeling. And I think this confidence comes with action. So you need to start doing this, because otherwise, yes, this is what I thought, that podcast guesting is only for extroverted people, or is only for the most successful business owners out there. But no, it's for everyone who has a message to share. If you have clients and if you help them get results, then this could be for you.
I love that. And I think sometimes we have to remember just to go out here and do it scared. I think somebody is listening right now and maybe has never been on a podcast but is interested in it. And you're like, well, why are people going to pick me? And you have to remember, you're an expert. You have a unique viewpoint. You have a unique perspective that no one else has, because you're going to bring all of your experiences, all your education to the table. And that's what's going to make you unique. Don't try to be cookie cutter. Don't try to say the same thing that someone else would say, because that's not interesting. And people listen to podcasts because they want unique perspectives, unique takeaways, unique viewpoints from other people. And you want to show up as authentic as you can, right? You don't want to be trying to be somebody else, right? If you are a naturally goofy person, be naturally goofy on the podcast. If you're a very serious person, be very serious, because the people who resonate with how you show up on these podcasts will want to know more. They're going to want to go and follow you on social media. They're going to want to check out your website. They're going to want to see how else they can work with you, whether that's through a book, whether that's through a course, whether that's through coaching or consulting or what have you. And I think that we want to make sure we're optimizing our exposure. And so when you're going through this pitch process, just keep in mind, be yourself. It's gonna be fine. I've booked podcasts, especially when I first started, with no other podcast, no other media published, and they still wanted me. And now that I have been on many podcasts, I still have to come up with unique things to say. I can't say the same thing on every single podcast. And so, it's going to be a journey. It's going to be interesting. Some people are going to say no, and that's okay. But you just got to get out there and start pitching. So before we go, I want to let you have some time to give us any final thoughts, especially around the pitching process. And then, of course, let us know where we can find you.
Absolutely. So I think it's a great opportunity that we have these days to put ourselves out there. And you need to keep in mind that you are going to refine your message the more you are going to do it. So don't be afraid. As Corey said, yes, you are going to get some no's, but those no's are just part of the process. So you will want to focus on the yeses, you want to focus on the opportunities, and don't let this fear stop you, because this is what I did. And I just stayed in the same spot for more than 3 years. And now I'm seeing more opportunities and incredible things that are going to happen just because I allowed myself to put myself out there. So this is what I want from you. This is what I want for you. This is not a difficult process, but you need to make a decision. You need to think about that you want to be a speaker, you want to be a podcast guest, and you want to do this with all your energy, with good vibes, because this is going to show up on those podcast interviews. So if you want to start this journey and want to have these details in place of what do I need to do before I start reaching out to people, I want to invite you to download my free checklist with 10 steps that you need to have in place. And you are going to find it at oneluckystar.com/free checklist.
Awesome. So oneluckystar.com/free checklist. Definitely check her out there. I'm going to put her other socials as well on the screen so you can check her out. Here's and those of you who are listening, they will be in the show notes, of course. You can also find her on Instagram. You can find her on LinkedIn. And then you can also find her on Facebook. But definitely don't miss out on that freebie, guys. And look, she's already told you it's going to be there. It's going to be there.
It's going to be there, yes. Even 6 months from now.
It will be there. I love that. I'm going to download it for myself as well, because I realized through this pitch framework that I'm missing a few steps. And that's the point of it. All of us can learn and grow no matter where we are in business. So I want to thank our guests for coming here today. Thank you, Nina, so much for being a part of this podcast and letting us know how to show up as the best podcast guest that we possibly can. I look forward to collaborating with you more this year. This has been just an amazing conversation. And if you like this conversation and you're interested to hear more from different experts talking about their area of expertise, tune into this podcast every single week as we bring on a new amazing expert to share more about what they do and how we can benefit from their level of expertise. Thank you, guys, and we'll talk to you soon.